I'm a museum guide at the National History Museum in Prague. Last Thursday, this guy walks up to our Czech flag exhibit. He's maybe 35, wearing a North Carolina state hoodie, nice camera around his neck. He stares at the red, white, and blue horizontal stripes for a good 20 seconds. Then he goes, "Hey, why does the Czech Republic use the Russian flag?" I blink. "Sir, that's the Czech flag. It has a blue triangle on the left side." He squints closer. "Oh, but isn't Czech Republic part of Russia anyway?" The school group behind him goes silent. Even the teenagers. That same week, I watched an American woman at a Copenhagen train station argue with the ticket agent because the city names on the departure board weren't in English. She kept saying, "But how am I supposed to know where I'm going?" The agent, exhausted, pointed out that Stockholm is spelled the same in both languages. She insisted it should say Stockholm, Sweden, after every listing. What if there's another Stockholm? The agent just sighed. "Ma'am, there is only one Stockholm the train can reach from here. My friend Hassan works at a currency exchange in Dubai. He told me about an American businessman who wanted to exchange his European money for dirhams. Hassan asked what kind. The guy dumps out a handful of euros, Swiss francs, and British pounds. You know, European money? It's all the same, right?" Hassan had to explain that Europe has multiple currencies. The man looked genuinely shocked. "But it's one continent. I've been collecting these stories for 3 years now. And here's what I've noticed. It's not that Americans are stupid. It's that they genuinely think the world works differently than it does. I document patterns most people never notice because they're too close to see them. If you want this level of pattern recognition applied to other blind spots we all have, the kind of analysis that makes you stop and rethink what you thought you knew, subscribe. I do this deep dive research weekly. And the people who follow this work, they're the ones who see systems, not just stories, like their mental map has entire countries, in the wrong place or missing completely. A taxi driver in Buenos Aires once told me about an American couple who asked him why everyone in Argentina spoke Mexican. When he said they speak Spanish, the woman goes, "Right, Mexican." He gave up trying to explain, but that was just the beginning. Because once you start noticing this pattern, you see it everywhere. I work the information desk at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, so I see a lot of confused travelers. But nothing prepared me for the guy who asked me last September how long the train to Germany takes. I told him, about 2 hours to the border. Depends where in Germany. He nods, thinking hard. Then he goes, "And from Germany, how do I get to Amsterdam?" I just stare at him. "Sir, you're in Amsterdam right now. This is Amsterdam." He looks around the terminal, like he's seeing it for the first time. "Wait, Amsterdam is in Holland, right?" "Yes, Holland is a region in the Netherlands. Amsterdam is the capital." His face does this slow collapse thing. "So, the Netherlands and Holland are the same place?" "Essentially, yes." "Then where's Germany?" I pull up a map on the desk computer. Show him. The Netherlands. Germany right next door to the east. His finger traces the border, and he goes, real quiet. "I thought Holland was in Germany." He's holding a hotel booking for Rotterdam. He'd been planning his whole trip, thinking he was going to a German city. The thing is, he seemed like a normal guy. Mid-40s, worked in insurance, had traveled to Mexico and Canada before. He just never learned where European countries actually are. In his mind, they were all vaguely arranged near each other. The specifics didn't matter until he was standing in the wrong mental location. My colleague at the train information booth in Stockholm has a similar story. American retiree, maybe 68, very sweet lady. She wants to take a day trip to see the fjords. "Which train do I take to the fjords?" she asks. My colleague says, "Ma'am, Stockholm doesn't have fjords. You're thinking of Norway." The woman pulls out her guidebook. It's a Nordic travel guide, covering all 5 countries. She'd been reading the Norway sections and the Sweden sections, and just assumed they were the same place, with different cities. So I can't see fjords from here? Not the famous ones, no. Norway is a different country. To the west, she looks crushed. How far is Norway? Oslo is about 7 hours by train. She sits down on a bench, recalculating her entire trip. Later, my colleague overhears her on the phone. Did you know Sweden and Norway aren't the same country? I feel so stupid. But she didn't sound stupid. She sounded like someone who just learned something she'd never needed to know before. I have a friend who works at a hotel in Budapest. American study abroad student checks in. 20 years old. Bright kid studying economics. He asks the front desk guy where he can get some Czech currency exchanged. We use the forint here, sir. This is Hungary. The kid goes, right, but I'm going to Prague tomorrow. That's in the Czech Republic, which is part of Hungary, right? My friend explains. Czechoslovakia split in 1993. The Czech Republic and Slovakia are separate countries. Neither one is part of Hungary. The student just stares. They split? When did that happen? 32 years ago. Oh, long pause. That wasn't in my textbook. Here's what gets me about these stories. These aren't drunk tourists at 3 in the morning. They're regular people. In the middle of the day, asking honest questions based on what they think they know. Their mental maps just have blanks where European countries should be, or worse, wrong information filling those blanks. I asked my Australian coworker if she ever sees this with Australian tourists. She laughed. Mate, we have to learn where everything is. Because we're so far from everything, Americans can drive 12 hours and still be in America. They don't need to know where Slovenia is. Maybe that's it. When your own country has 50 states spread across a continent, maybe. You stop tracking other countries as carefully, but then you get off the plane in Prague, see a flag, and your brain goes, that's Russia, right? And you're standing there, confidently wrong, asking a question that makes a whole museum go quiet. Last month, a woman asked me if Prague is the capital of Poland. When I said no, that's Warsaw. She goes, then what's Prague the capital of? I tell her, the Czech Republic. She thinks for a second. Is that near Poland? Yes, they share a border. Oh, so they're like the same area. Not exactly, but they're neighboring countries. She nods, satisfied. That makes sense. They both sound Eastern European. I watched her walk away to join her husband, and I thought, she's going to go home and tell people she visited Eastern Europe. She'll show them pictures. She might even say she loved Prague, but she won't actually know where Prague is on a map. And somehow, that'll be fine until her next trip, when she has to learn it all over again. I'm a tour guide in Marrakesh, Morocco, 3 times a week. Someone asks me which part of the Middle East we're in. I tell them, we're in North Africa. They look confused. But Morocco is an Arab country, right? Yes, predominantly. So that's the Middle East. No, that's North Africa. Last April, this American couple joins my tour. Super nice people. Asked good questions about architecture and history. At the spice market, the husband goes, so what other Middle Eastern countries can we visit from here? I explained, Morocco is African. You can visit other African countries easily. Tunisia, Algeria. He stops walking. Wait, Africa? I thought we were near Saudi Arabia. His wife checks her phone maps. Zooms out, her face changes as she sees where Morocco actually is. Oh my God, honey. We're in Africa. He looks at her phone. Long silence. I thought Africa was just the bottom part. They weren't upset, just genuinely surprised. She goes, I guess I never thought about where Morocco actually was. I just knew it was Muslim and had markets. We continued the tour. But I could tell they were mentally rearranging their whole understanding of geography. My friend Priya works at a hotel in Mumbai. She checked in an American digital nomad last year. Guy in his late 20s. Laptop bag over his shoulder. Strong opinions about coffee. He asks her, what's the best way to visit the rest of Southeast Asia while he's based in Mumbai? She says, Sir, India is in South Asia, not Southeast Asia. He pulls up a map on his phone. Isn't it all kind of the same region? She points out, Southeast Asia usually means Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. That area, India's on the Indian subcontinent. Different region entirely. He looks embarrassed, but then goes, okay, but they're both in Asia, so it's the same general area, right? Priya, very patiently, explains that Asia is massive, India to Thailand. 2 feet is about the same distance as New York to Los Angeles. He clearly had no idea. I just figured since India was Asian, I could easily hop around to other Asian countries. He'd been planning weekend trips to places that required multiple connecting flights. I have a cousin in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Works at a travel agency. American businessman walks in, wanting to book a trip to Machu Picchu, in Peru. He asks if they can drive there. My cousin says, no, you need to fly to Lima, then another flight or train to Cusco. The guy seems annoyed. But isn't Peru right next to Brazil? Can't we just drive across? My cousin pulls out a map. Yes, they share a border, but Brazil is enormous. Sao Paulo to the Peru border is over 2,000 miles through the Amazon. The man blinks. I thought South America was smaller. Here's what I think happens. Americans learn the continents in elementary school. 7 continents. Nice and simple, but they never really learn what's in those continents. So Africa becomes this vague blob where poor countries are. Asia becomes where manufacturing happens and people eat rice. South America becomes where they speak Spanish. The actual countries, the distances, the cultures, all blur together. I led a tour last week where an American woman asked me if Morocco was safe. Fair question. I told her yes. Marrakech is very safe for tourists. She relaxes and goes, good. Because I heard Africa is dangerous, I asked. What do you mean? You know, with all the wars and animals. I had to explain. Africa has 54 countries. Some have conflict. Many don't. And the animals she's thinking of are mostly in East and Southern Africa. Specific wildlife areas. Morocco has mountains, cities, beaches. No lions wandering the streets. She looked embarrassed. I guess I just think of Africa as one big place, like how Europe is. But Europe isn't one big place either. I didn't say that out loud. My coworker Ahmed has a story too. An American tourist asked if we use African money here. Ahmed said, we use Moroccan dirhams. The tourist seemed surprised. But don't you guys have like an African dollar or something? No, 54 countries. Dozens of different currencies. He just shook his head. That seems complicated. What's complicated is trying to explain to someone that their mental model of the world is fundamentally wrong. That continents aren't small or uniform. That you can't just lump Morocco with Kenya because they're both in Africa. That the distance from Mumbai to Bangkok is massive. That Brazil alone is almost as big as the entire United States. Most content gives you reactions to individual stories. I give you the framework underneath them. If you've realized while watching this that you're learning how to think differently, not just what to think, you're getting what subscribers come here for. This isn't geography content. It's mental model correction. And I apply this to everything. I've learned not to make people feel stupid about it. I just show them the map. Let them see the scale. And usually, they're amazed. I had no idea Africa was this big, they'll say. Or, I didn't know Asia stretched that far. And I think, how did you not know? But then I remember, if you grow up looking at a map where your own country fills the frame, everything else shrinks. It all becomes distant, small, vaguely unimportant, until you're standing in a Moroccan market. Surprised to learn, you're on a completely different continent than you thought. I work at a university in Wellington, New Zealand, in the International Student Office. American exchange students arrive every semester, and part of my job is helping them adjust. Last year, a student from Texas shows up for orientation. Smart kid, environmental science major. We're going through paperwork, and he asks, "So, do I need a visa to visit Australia while I'm here?" I tell him yes. Americans need a visa for Australia. He looks surprised. But isn't Australia part of New Zealand? I get this question maybe twice a year. I pull up a map. No, Australia is a separate country. Different government, different currency. About 2,000 miles away. He stares at the map. I thought New Zealand was like a state in Australia. I show him 2 separate island nations. He goes, real quiet. My teacher said Oceania. I thought that meant they were one place. What struck me was how confident he'd been. He wasn't asking if they might be the same country. He was operating on the assumption that they definitely were, and now his whole understanding of the region was rearranging itself. My friend works at a pharmacy in Reykjavik, Iceland. American tourist comes in. Middle-aged guy with a bad cold. He's buying medicine and asks if they take euros. She says no. We use Icelandic krona. He frowns. But Iceland's in Europe, right? She confirms. Yes, geographically, but not in the European Union. They have their own currency. He looks at his wallet. I thought all of Europe used the same money. She lists off a few that don't. UK, Switzerland, Norway, Sweden. His face goes through this slow realization. So the euro isn't just European money? No, she says. It's the currency of some European countries. He stands there processing for a solid 10 seconds. Then he goes, "That's confusing. But here's a worse one. My brother works at a museum in Nairobi, Kenya. American family visits. Parents and 2 teenage kids. They're looking at an exhibit on Kenyan independence from Britain. The dad reads a panel and turns to my brother. So Kenya used to be British? Yes. Like part of Britain? No, a British colony. What's the difference? My brother explains colonialism, how Britain controlled Kenya, but it wasn't part of Britain itself. The dad nods, still puzzled. So where's Kenya now? Like, what country is it part of? My brother just stares. Kenya is a country, sir. An independent country. We've been independent since 1963. The dad looks at his wife. She looks at the map. Their teenage daughter sighs. Dad. Kenya is its own country. It's in Africa. The dad seems embarrassed, but also defensive. I know it's in Africa. I meant what region. But that's not what he meant. He genuinely thought, Kenya must be part of some larger country now. This is where American geography education really falls apart. They learn countries that matter to American interests. Britain, France, Germany, China, Japan, maybe Mexico and Canada. Everything else? Optional. So you get adults who know Kenya exists. They've heard the name, but they have no framework for understanding it. As an independent nation, I was talking to a flight attendant from Singapore Airlines last month. She told me about an American passenger who asked if Singapore was in China. She said, no. Singapore's its own country. He goes, but everyone there is Chinese, right? She explained, Singapore is multi-ethnic. Ethnically, Chinese Singaporeans are Singaporean citizens. Not Chinese nationals. He still didn't get it. But it's basically part of China. She gave up. We're an independent country in Southeast Asia. He nodded like he understood. But she's pretty sure he didn't. My favorite story comes from a hotel receptionist in Budapest. American guest asks, "What language do you speak here?" She says, "Hungarian." He goes, "Is that like German?" "No, completely different language family." "But you're in Europe, right? Don't you all speak European?" She had to explain that Europe has dozens of languages. The guest looked overwhelmed. "How do you all talk to each other?" "English, mostly. Plus many Europeans speak several languages." The guest just shook her head. "That sounds exhausting. Here's the thing that gets me. These aren't isolated incidents. I'm part of an online group for tourism workers, and we share stories like this weekly. Americans asking if Austria is part of Germany, if Portugal is in Spain, if Scotland is a city in England. These aren't stupid people. They're just operating with massive gaps in their geographic knowledge. And the worst part, when you correct them, they're usually surprised, but not really bothered. Like, "Oh, interesting." And then they move on. Because in their daily lives, whether Kenya is independent or not, doesn't matter. Whether Australia and New Zealand are separate nations, doesn't affect them. So the information slides right back out. I had a guest last year, asked me 3 times in 1 week if Australia was part of New Zealand. I corrected him each time. On his last day, he thanked me for showing him around New Zealand and its territories. I didn't correct him again. Some things you just can't fix in a week. But the story that really stays with me happened last month. I'm doing a walking tour, and this American woman joins the group. Maybe 55. Retired teacher from Ohio. Polite. Curious. Takes notes in a little journal. At lunch, she sits next to me and says, "Can I ask you something?" "Without you thinking I'm stupid?" I tell her. "Of course." She opens her journal. I've been writing down all the countries people have mentioned on this trip, and I realized I don't know where most of them are. I know they exist, but if you gave me a blank map, I couldn't place them. She shows me her list. Tunisia, Algeria, Mauritania, Western Sahara, Libya, all Morocco's neighbors. Countries she'd heard other tourists mention. I taught 3rd grade for 30 years, she says. I taught geography. I made kids memorize state capitals. But I never learned this. We talked for 20 minutes. She said American geography focuses on the U.S. and maybe the big global players. Everything else? Trivia. We'd get a world map and label like 15 countries. The big ones. And that was it. She always meant to learn more, but never had a reason. I knew where France was because of Paris. I knew where Egypt was because of the pyramids. But all these others, they were just names in the news. What struck me was how honest she was. No defensiveness, no excuses. Just, I don't know this, and I should. She spent the rest of the trip studying maps on her phone. By the end of the week, she could point out Morocco's neighbors. She'd learned which were Arab League members, which used to be French colonies, which had Berber populations. She told me, I can't believe I went 55 years without knowing where Morocco was on a map. Like, really knowing. I think about her sometimes, when other tourists ask me basic geography questions, because most people never have that moment of realization. They don't stop and think, wait, why don't I know this? They just keep going, with a mental map full of blank spaces and wrong labels, and it works fine until they're standing in Prague, looking at a flag, asking why the Czech Republic uses Russia's flag. Real reason Americans keep failing world geography isn't that they're dumb. It's not even just the education system, though that's part of it. It's that they live in a country so big and so self-contained that world geography feels optional. You can have a full, successful life in America without knowing where Morocco is, without knowing Austria and Australia are different places, without realizing Africa isn't a country. But then you travel, and suddenly, those blank spaces matter. You're asking a museum guide in Prague why they're using the Russian flag. A whole school group goes silent, and you realize your mental map was wrong. All along, the stories never stop coming. Just yesterday, someone asked me if Morocco was in the Middle East. I pulled up a map, showed them North Africa. They nodded, seeing it clearly for the first time. And I thought, this is someone's moment. This is when they learn. Maybe that's enough. Maybe every corrected question fills in a blank space. Maybe every surprised tourist staring at a map is someone's geography education finally catching up. And maybe somewhere there's a retired teacher from Ohio teaching her friends where Morocco actually is.